All right. Nothing special today. I'm just wearing this because I came from something and I was wearing this. So no specific ceremony or special day. Um, we have been talking about books in this season, and we just came from a sequence of me recommending you books in specific languages so that you get an introduction not only to those languages, to those cultures, to those traditions in writing books, but also with a specific purpose, which was in those videos to help you figuring out life, understanding what's going on, ask yourself the correct questions, become more introspective, somehow learning to think a little bit, and so on. That was the objective of recommending you 5 books in English, 5 books in German, and so on. This is going to be a little different. I'm going to change a little bit the topics, but we are still talking about books for sure, and I'm still with recommendations. It's just that I want to make this series a little longer, recommending you things on other areas, so to say. And today we are going to talk about politics. I'm going to recommend you books on politics. Why do I want to recommend you books on politics? And why am I going to recommend the books that I'm going to recommend you? Not because I want you to understand a specific conflict in some part of the world. Not because I want you to become a politician in the future, but because I want you to understand a little bit the dynamics of politics. Why am I telling you that I want you to understand a little bit the dynamics of politics? Because when you start studying classical theory in politics, when you start studying the most important authors, which in my opinion are the ones that I'm going to recommend to you, you start understanding that history repeats itself all the time, and that unfortunately we humans do not learn the lessons because the attitudes are always the same, the patterns are always the same, the behaviors are always the same. What people in power are looking for is always the same. What they will do to achieve those goals is always the same. So I want you to understand this generic perspective, so to say. I want you to have this bird's eye view of what politics is, and I want you to have this introductory approach to it so that you get an idea on what politics is, a little bit how it works, and so on. That's why I'm going to recommend you the books that I'm going to recommend you. If I wanted you to understand a specific conflict in Palestine, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, or in any part of the world, I would give you specific bibliography. But I want you to get the generic theory, so to say. What are the main principles? What are the main concepts? So you can start thinking about politics when you want to study it or when you want to analyze it. And it's also a good introduction for whatever you read afterwards, because you're going to have like the basic tools. So let's not waste much more time and let's go straight to the point without much explanation about the books, because the books that I'm going to recommend you are normally a little bit big, and they are normally complicated and dense, and there are so many points to be discussed that I'm never going to be able to cover them in one video. I want to start, of course, with probably the first classic in politics, which is The Republic from Plato. I would really like you to be able to read that. Of course, if you cannot read in ancient Greek, read it in whichever good translation directly from ancient Greek you can get. Don't get translation from translation. I don't know, an English version translated from the French version. Because if translations are already bad, if you get a translation from a translation, you're just missing basically the whole point of the book. So if you cannot read in ancient Greek, try to get a translation directly from ancient Greek. I think you should read The Republic because it's one of the first efforts in history to explain to people how a state should work, how a republic, a res public, a public thing, that is the translation, should work. It's an extremely dense book with lots of theories, lots of explanations in different concepts. It's a very difficult book to be understood, despite the simplifications that people make of Plato. But it's a very, very, very dense book that covers lots of topics in terms on how a society should work. And I think it's a good introduction. It's a good way to start. I'm not telling you that is the model or that we should all be like that. There are things that still apply, things that are maybe more from that time, from the time Plato is writing, but there are so many things that remain actual, that make you think, that make you consider how politics should work and how politics should be. So I definitely recommend you reading this. And of course, you should read what we could consider some kind of answer. It's not a direct answer, but you could consider some kind of answer to Plato's book, which is Aristotle's Politics. Aristotle wrote a book called Politics, no? And in this book, Aristotle is not going to make the same thing as Plato, like building an ideal state from scratch, but he's going to discuss all kinds of political systems, how they work, how they are corrupted, how one degenerates into another, and he's going to give you some basic generic elements on what politics is, how they should be, how they should not be, what a leader is, what a good political leader is, and so on. And he's going to kind of classify all kinds of politicians, all kinds of systems, and so on. It's a kind of systematic book to give you an approach, a first idea on what politics is. From here, we are going to jump lots of centuries in the future, and we are going to land directly in The Prince from Machiavel. And why do I want you to read The Prince from Machiavel? I would like you to read this book because Machiavel is going to explain to you the crudest way, the most naked way possible, what politics is all about. When we have all these discussions nowadays about we need moral in the politics, we need ethics in the politics, and blah blah blah, Machiavel is going to simply tell you something similar to what Dante said. Dante, in his book The Divine Comedy, says at the door, at the entrance door of Inferno, of hell, it was written, "Leave here all your hopes." And Machiavelli is going to do something similar. He's going to tell you, at the entrance of the political world, you have to leave at the door morals and ethics, because they simply do not apply. That's what he's going to tell you. He's going to tell you that politics is ultimately about violence and how to use violence in a definitive way in order to win something in a way that cannot be lost afterwards, in order to conquer something. And then he's going to explain to you how to keep it, how a prince should work, and all those things. But it's a very good, let's say, slap in the face to wake you up to what politics really is. That's it. Just go for it, and I think you're not going to regret later when you want to understand what's going on with the world. Next book that I want to recommend to you is Laws, Les Lois, from Montesquieu. Montesquieu wrote a very big book, a very dense, very long book, long as the Republic from Plato and so on laws. And one of the things that I like the most about this book is that Montesquieu is going to explain to you that there is no perfect system. But more than that, there is no perfect system that works for everyone, depending on the size of your country, depending on the kind of weather that you have in your country, depending on the geographics of your country, depending on the religion that is predominant in your country. You are going to have different political systems that work better to run, to administrate that country. And of course, it's a huge book. It's going to talk about thousands of things. One of them is this that I just told you, which I really appreciate, which I really like in times as the ones we live, where people say that there is only one formula, one perfect way of running the things, and we should all go for that one because it's the ultimate goal in politics. I think that Montesquieu is going to show that things are not so easy like that, and you cannot simplify things like that. Next book I want you to read is, of course, The Social Contract from Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The Social Contract from Jean-Jacques Rousseau is basically an explanation on why people live in society. No? The old Aristotle used to say that man is a zoon politikon, that is a political animal, and people transformed that into a social animal and started saying that we love to socialize, we love to get together, we are gregarians, we are groups, and blah, blah, blah. Kind of distorting a little bit what Aristotle said. And what Rousseau is going to tell you is we get together in order to organize ourselves, in order to be able to live in society in a way that is more or less organized and not chaotic. And of course, he's going to have thousands of discussions. It's in this book that he's going to talk about his concept of how humans are and what society does to humans. And I think you should have a look at this book from Rousseau because it gives you a very generic perspective on how society builds itself. Let's move on. Next book that I want you to read is Leviathan from Hobbes. And for that one specifically, I'm going to ask you a favor. I would like you to try to read it in English, and I would like you to try to search for ancient versions, the versions that were written in the original way Hobbes wrote it in English, because there is a huge discussion on the topic of what he's going to call the Commonwealth, that later started being translated as state. And this is a huge mistake. That's a very misinterpretation of Leviathan. That's a very big misinterpretation of Hobbes. And for all those who come and say, but when the French asked Hobbes if they could translate into French Commonwealth pour État, and Hobbes said yes, so we should be able to translate all the times by state. No, because État at the time of the translation doesn't mean the same thing that state means now. So if you could read Leviathan in the original English, when Hobbes writes Commonwealth, every time he wants to refer to that state, so to say, but without using the word state, it's going to be easier to understand the context and the explanations and the authors with whom he's dialoguing and why he's talking that way. Last but not least, I want you to read the 2 treatises on government from John Locke. I know that all those who are like more lefty oriented and blah 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 will say that I'm recommending something from liberals and so on. Look, people, I'm not liberal, I'm not lefty, I'm a guy who tries to understand things, and I'm a guy who reads the classics, who reads the most important authors to try to understand what they are talking about, to try to understand how politics works. And these 7 books, including the one from John Locke, are going to help you understand how politics work, all kinds of possible theories, all kinds of possible approaches to how society is, to how society should be, to what society should not become. And the 2 treatises on government are 2 books in one that makes a quite big book with lots of explanations of John Locke. It doesn't matter if you agree with him. I'm not asking you to read these people to agree with them. I'm asking you to read these people because they're going to give you a very solid base to start. They're going to give you orientation to move on afterwards in the political theory and understanding what other authors are saying. The video is already long, it's 13 minutes already, I'm gonna cut it here, but get these 7 books, get these 7 authors, start your journey into political sciences, into political theory, and I'm pretty sure you're going to be able to find much more afterwards, but you're going to have a good solid base that will be able to guide you, to give you some orientation when you read some other authors. And try to remain as much as you can in the classics, in the authors that wrote before the 19th century or until the beginning of the 19th century before you move on, because afterwards it's a lot of commentary, analysis, specific topics, and I want you to come with a very wide open, free of prejudices perspective before you dive into specifics. Okay? See you in the next episode.